Welcome to the Veterans Who Built show. Today's guest, we have a U.S. Navy SeaBee, later became a Army Reserve Chaplain Candidate, continued his career working for a national GC as a superintendent, hosts a podcast for veterans in construction as well, and he created a nonprofit for veterans. So, as you can imagine, an amazing person, and I'm very excited for y'all to hear what he has to say, his story and advice. Quick shout out to our subscribers and listeners. Thank you. A reminder to please subscribe to our channels. Hit that like button, hit that review. It really helps us grow our channel, grow our reach. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, please welcome Scott Freed. Thank you to our channel sponsors, Jet.Build. If you're looking for ways to better manage your real estate development and construction projects, look no further. Jet is the command center software for end-to-end real estate development and construction management. That's www.jet.build. Scott, thanks so much for joining us today, man.
Yeah, man, I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Where are you calling in from today?
So I am about 30 minutes south of Dallas, Texas.
Nice. What's weather like there right now for you?
It sucks.
Damn.
We're getting into the rainy season, so it's not good, but yeah, can't complain.
You know, I like asking that question because I envision, especially for you, right, being a super, being on job sites in the field. So I like to kind of get that context of what you're experiencing day to day.
Yeah, we're in and out on this job I'm on now, so it's any chance I have to go inside the building is awesome.
Yeah, I hear that, man. I hope the rain passes quick. Yeah. All right, so giving a formal introduction to Scott. Scott served for 7 years of active duty Navy, 5 of which was spent as a SeaBee and 2 years in the Army Reserve as a chaplain candidate. Scott deployed twice, one of which was to Afghanistan, serving as JSOC support. Today, Scott is a superintendent for a nationwide commercial general contractor based in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex, a fellow podcast host, nonprofit leader, and relationship builder. Links to Scott's profile and endeavors in general will be in the show notes. Always like to give a shout out in particular to any fellow podcast hosts. So definitely check out Scott's podcast in the show notes.
Yeah, it's a labor of love for sure. I'm sure you feel that.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely, man. All right. So, as the listeners know, and as you know, as we chatted before we got started, we like to start in chronological order. So tell us about, where you grew up and what led you during childhood to your service.
Yeah. So I grew up, I'm rocking the Cincinnati Reds hat. So I grew up about 15 minutes from Cincinnati, Ohio in Northern Kentucky. Normal childhood, didn't grow up poor or rich, kind of right in the middle, right? So normal raising. And what really got me interested in the service was my dad is a Vietnam era Navy vet. And I can always remember him showing me the books, his cruise books from deployments. And I really appreciated the history of it and what he did and what the guys back in his day did. He's 76 now, to give you context. So these are black and white photos I'm looking at of old school ships. And I just thought that was really neat. So I knew I wanted to serve. I can still remember having a big G.I. Joe, I think it was G.I. Joe, some brand, big Marine. I went, I want to be in the Marines though. I was a knucklehead in high school, had no direction, honestly. And like I said, we didn't really come for money. So I knew I wasn't going to go to college right away. And so I can remember there was a recruiter that came into our school, and it was a Navy recruiter, a Navy chief. And I'm asking him all these questions, kind of poking fun at him. And, it wasn't fair of me to do that. But eventually when I came into the office to recruit, he's like, man, it's always the jokers. It's always the clowns. But I wanted to join the Marine Corps originally, and I was 17 at the time. And so if you're under 18, you need your parents' permission. My dad said, if you're going to join, you're not joining anything but the Navy. So, okay, well, I'm going to try to find a cool job then, I guess. So yeah, went in. First 2 years I did as a combat support aircrewman, flying on 53s, MH-53 Echo, huge aircraft. Yeah, man, there's a lot more to it, obviously, what brought me there, but I guess I really had no direction. That was the biggest thing. And I was running with the wrong crowd, knew I needed to do something with my life, couldn't afford college, really didn't understand student loans at the time or anything. Figured, hey, I'll do 4 years in and that'll pay for college maybe. So, and then life took a turn once I got in.
Yeah, I got you. It's always hard to unpack all of the small things, and in that kind of train of thought is why this show exists, is to try and bring these things to light, to bring context to fellow veterans. So in that experience of childhood, is there anything in particular that just comes to mind that was a aha moment per se, that led to service?
I don't know if there was one in particular, really. My cousin, who is a few years older than I am, he served in the Navy as well. And then I had a lot of extended family members that served, and I just felt like there was some sort of an obligation there, maybe. I wouldn't say there was one single moment, really. There's some moments that led me to construction, which I'm sure we'll get into.
Yeah.
But no, I figured, hey, this is neat. I like the history of it all, and I can just I go back to all the times he was showing me these cool books, and I
Right.
appreciated the history of the service more than anything.
Yeah, what's funny? I always find that those black and white photos are just so much more impactful than what we see today. I don't know
Oh,
if I can even explain that. It's just how I feel for no real reason.
yeah, like it seems unreal almost,
Right.
and um, there's that country song, you should have seen it in color. Like there's just
Hmm.
something about seeing these real cool old photos and how people used to live, and you get an idea in mind of what it must have been like to serve
Right.
back then, and you want to be part of that history, and then you get in and realize things are drastically different than your parents probably had it. But yeah.
Right, as they always are. So was when you enlisted, was your dad supportive of that effort? It sounded like he was.
Yeah, very much so. I can't say that my entire family was. I mean, my mom was losing her son to the service, which is
Hmm.
always hard on any mother. Moving away. I'd never lived away from home. I don't even think, I was trying to think prior to the interview, man, did I ever spend that much time apart from my parents before boot camp? And I
Yeah.
didn't. But they were all really supportive and they were proud of me. My friends thought I was crazy because I was the only one in my friend group at the time who would join. Later on, one of my close friends who was a year younger than me did join the Marine Corps. Um, so yeah, I think everybody was pretty supportive of it.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. I was going to ask that if your peer group, if your friends, anyone was joining as well. Did anyone, I guess older than you, year ahead of you or so, that you knew join?
There were some people in my high school that did.
Hmm.
I can remember there was one guy, he might have been a year or two ahead of me, that joined the Navy. He went into, I want to say, submarine service, maybe.
Hmm.
But it really wasn't that popular, I guess.
Yeah.
And I didn't go to a massive school or anything. I didn't grow up in a small town, but I didn't grow up in a massive metropolitan area like Dallas. So yeah, it was I was not the norm, I guess, going to join the
Right.
service.
Right. That's why I ask. I'm always just intrigued by kind of the environment as a kid. If you're seeing other people do something, of course you're
Yeah.
therefore more likely to be aware of it, or do it. And the fact that that wasn't the case for you is really interesting. So
Yeah.
walk us through kind of enlisting itself, and getting started, boot camp, getting into your unit, that whole process.
So, like I said, I kind of teased that chief, not knowing what rank that was really at the time. So, I can remember walking into the recruiting station. Um, like I said, I was kind of a knucklehead, so I wasn't an athlete. Um, I was a singer in a rock band. Like I was just the hangout guy. Uh, no real direction. So I walk in and they're like, this guy's a schmuck. Um, and I wasn't in the best shape. I wasn't crazy overweight, but I wasn't in the best shape. I probably never ran more than like 20 feet in my life, except for maybe playing baseball as a kid. Um, and so went in, the chief at the time took a chance on me and he made me run. So it's a mile and a half for Navy boot camp. And he made me run this mile and a half. I don't recall what the time was, but I horribly failed. He's like, well, you got some work to do, bud. But he really helped me out. And it's all kind of a blur. It just all happened real fast. I just told my friends, hey, we graduate in June. I'm heading to boot camp in July. And off I went to Great Lakes, Chicago, or Illinois, excuse me, which was cool because, I in preparation for our interview, I actually listened to Ron's episode a little bit and heard the jokes about the boot camp. So Navy has one boot camp, which is in Great Lakes, and it was cool because that's the same spot that my dad was in. Obviously, the barracks are much newer now. When I went in, but like I said, I had a tough time at first because that was the first time I'd really ever been away from my parents. I can remember going to the chaplain and feeling so distraught. I'm like, oh, what if something happens to my family? And of course, he's like, there's nothing you can really do about it. Don't know if that was the best advice at the time, but it worked and it kind of snapped me out of it. And I'm sure every generation has this of, well, boot camp was harder when I went in, but I do remember they were yelling and screaming. So it was not the kinder, gentler Navy at the time. This is 2004. So, we're at the height of the war, basically, or getting there. It's heating up. I really had no idea what I was getting myself into, but it was, I don't want to say easy, but you've served, you get it, that follow direction and everything's going to be just fine. Yeah. I think the toughest thing I had was the physical aspect of it, just because I never really paid attention to nutrition or paid attention to, my physical fitness much at all. So I really struggled there. But other than that, it kind of went by, I want to say it was 8 weeks, and it kind of flew by. So nothing real crazy.
Yeah, it's really, really funny. I always laugh at that, catching myself thinking the way of, oh, it was more, more difficult. It was harder. It was X, Y, Z back in my day. And I recall, like, I don't know, as a kid thinking about how funny that was to hear adults, quote unquote, say that. And here I am, yeah. reverting to that concept.
You're like, man, I'm middle aged now, and I'm the one saying it. But at the time, it was the hardest thing I'd ever done in my life. And I think a lot of us, even guys that were athletes, it was at the time, I think it was more mental stress than anything because you're in this new environment. And so, you look back on all the stuff that you went through, like that was a cakewalk, man. That was nothing. So what they're doing. They're breaking you down and trying to build you back up and get ready for the more difficult stuff.
Yeah, I was wondering if you were going to say that. I was hoping you would bring up the aspect of, mental strength, right? Mental fortitude. In reference to you mentioning coming into service without having like a real physical kind of background or regiment per se. And what I always found really interesting is, myself in my own journey, I remember just spending so like crazy amounts of time just prepping myself physically for service. And then, you get in and you realize in about, I don't know, maximum 24 hours. I mean, it's probably even half than that. You're going to just be broken physically. And it's all about, what kind of mental capability can you dig in and find to push yourself forward. So it sounds like you had a similar recognition there.
Yeah, and there, these guys are trained. There were kids that came in that were in way worse shape than I was. Mm-hmm. There were some that were put on their restrictive diets. I wasn't that bad, but it was definitely tough. It was a struggle for me to pass the PT test. Eventually, I got over it, and the cool thing was that was like my first moment of, hey man, I just had some real success. Like I busted my butt trying to get here. And so that was really encouraging to me and had that motivation to keep moving forward. Yeah. And the fact that it's not, they're not going to kick you out just because you're overweight. Well, eventually while you're in, right. But like they're there to train you to get you in that shape to keep moving on.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a really, really good model of, as you put it, right. And as we all know, breaking you down and then building you up, giving you those kind of achievement points to continue climbing towards. So, yeah, absolutely. So what happens next after basic?
So after I graduated, of course my family comes up. That was really cool. My dad and I's relationship really changed just because there was that mutual respect, which was great because, hey, now we're both serving. Then I got orders to go to Navy A school. So for those who don't know, A school is like your initial training for your job. So I went down and I signed up with an aircrew contract. So the way it used to be that aircrewmen, they have what was called a source rating, kind of like SEALs used to have the same thing where they could have been a cook and then they became a SEAL.
Right.
So aircrewmen were very similar in that where I had a source rating of, it was called AW. And I went to this school to do some training on how to spot some certain things on sonar, super secret type stuff while we were in the aircraft, but I had no desire to do that. So we basically, you got to aircrew school. That was kind of like another boot camp in itself. So I went down to Pensacola, Florida, had to go through aircrew school first. If I thought boot camp PT was hard, aircrew PT was way harder. Failed my PT test the first time again, had to go like remediate and go back and really whip myself into shape this time. And then I went to that A school. So aircrew school was between boot camp and A school. So finally graduated aircrew school, and you fill out this dream sheet of, hey, here's the jobs I want. Here's the job that an aircrewman can have as their source rating. So I picked my top 3, didn't get any of them. And it's needs of the military, right? I mean, you can, it's like those dream sheets are a joke. They're going to put you where they need you. So I went to that school and I realized like, this is not, I thought I was going to retire. I thought this is going to be my life. And the job that they had, nothing against those guys. They're great people. I just didn't want to do that job. So I eventually went into our senior chief's office. The hard part was that was his source rating. And so at first he was kind of offended, but at the same time, I appealed to him, Chief, I want to be an aircrewman, but I just don't see myself performing this job. Little did I know there was that combat support squadron that needed some folks that you didn't need that rate to be in that squadron. So I reclassed and I thought, I want to do something that I can help, but that's not, I don't want to say boring, something that's going to help the command, but at the same time, that might be an easier school to pass. So I became a parachute rigger, went to that A school. So that was my source rating. Now, at the time, aircrewmen didn't really do that job. Like they didn't do the source job, the source rating that they had. And again, I use other like SEALs or other units that have that source rate. Like you're not going to have a SEAL out there cooking; he's out there operating. So even though at the time that might have been his source rate, so eventually that changed in later years, where all aircrewmen became AW regardless of what squadron they were at. So after I got through PR A school, so parachute rigger, which a lot of the parachute rigger job is focused on safety equipment. You're not going to use a parachute in a helicopter, but you are paying attention to like the rafts and all the safety equipment for the crewmen. So you're really looking after your own gear and the other crew's gear if you serve in the paraloft. So got that training. It was great. I hung back for, I was in Pensacola for a year total. And so then I got orders to, it was called AWSTS, AWSTS. Don't ask me to remember what it stands for. But this was the training for that specific aircraft. So if you're going to be an aircrewman or a pilot on this specific aircraft, you go to that school. I don't recall exactly how long the school was, but this is where you start learning about the aircraft that you're going to be flying in. All about, the mechanical systems, emergency procedures. So basically in that aircraft, the pilots are kind of 10 to 2 and you're the eyes in the back. And so they're training you up to be a crew chief of sorts. And so you've got to know, if you're 500 miles away or you're downrange somewhere and something bursts or starts leaking fluid, you have to know how to patch that up and fix it, because the mechanics are all the way back in the hangar somewhere. So you kind of, maybe this was my first step into general contracting, because you kind of have to know a little bit about everything. So you know enough to be dangerous. So you know enough how to limp the bird back to the hangar, and then obviously you have the weapon systems in the back that you have to learn as well. So graduated that school. That's when you get to pin on your wings, which is a huge accomplishment for any aircrewman. Similar to like when a pilot goes through their training and they finally pin on their aviator wings. So the enlisted equivalent is an aircrewman. So it's your gold wings that say AC real big on them. Marine Corps has the same thing. So we trained alongside an aircrew school with Marines, had some Marine instructors, went to the squadron and never got to deploy. We kind of trained up for it, but the squadron was actually about to get decommissioned. So the Navy had 3 squadrons at the time. of these aircraft, and we were the only ones that did any kind of combat support, so hot insertion extraction. So we got to do a bunch of training. We got to train with some SEALs, got to train with some other high-speed units. And I'm thinking, this is so cool. I'm going, high speed, low drag. I'm going to have a great time. I can do this for the rest of my career. But then we found out we were being decommissioned, and what we thought the only other option was we're going to have to go to one of these other squadrons, and their mission set was a lot different. They towed different pieces of equipment, I'll say, to tow for mines and look for subs. And that's just, it was not something that particularly interested me. I did have some friends that went to those units. Some of them retired out. Again, nothing against them. It's just not what I wanted to do with my career, which was kind of a bummer for my leadership, because I said, well, if I choose something else, I basically am giving up the role as an aircrewman. So I had been trying for years to get to this point, and then realized I can't do the job that I want to do. But they understood. And so we had what's called a detailer, which is like a career counselor, basically. And they sat down in front of me and they said, all right, here's a list of the things that you qualify for because of your ASVAB score. And I looked through the list and I said, man, I just want to shoot guns and go fast still, guys. Like, let's do something fun. And at the time, I had no idea what a SeaBee was. And unless you've served, and even some people that have served have no idea what a SeaBee does, I didn't realize that they were in dire need of people because the war effort's ramping up. And I'm looking at this list and they said, well, you could go be a builder or a utilities man. And I'm like, what is this? What are you talking about? And they said, well, if you still want to be somewhat in kind of an action field, you can go be a SeaBee. And so they taught me a little bit about what it was. And so I kind of remembered, this is back to my growing up. My dad and his best friend, when I was younger, I was maybe 10, 11, they completely redid the basement of my house to make an additional bedroom and a restroom and a laundry room, excuse me. And I just thought that was so neat how they could take this shell of a space that was my dad's like just raggedy office that he had downstairs, and they turned it into this really cool bedroom. And I'm thinking, professionals do that. You can't do that by yourself. Little did I know. Now I do all my own work, right? So yeah. I'm looking at this stuff like, this is so cool. Well, I didn't think that would mean anything until later on in life, but I thought, you know what? Maybe I'll give this a try. I would much rather be able to build something and step back and look at it and be appreciative of the effort that I put in instead of just maintaining things. There are people that maintain aircraft, and that's awesome. That's their forte. That's what they like to do. It wasn't a job that I wanted to do. So, ended up, I was able to cross rate, which is what they call it. So I cross rated into builder, BU. So I had to go back to another A school. At this point, I got sent down to Gulfport, Mississippi, and I had to go back through another A school. I had not deployed at this point yet, but I had already gained rank. So I was an E4 at the time, going back into A school with 18-year-old kids and people straight out of high school or straight out of boot camp. So it was a very unique experience considering I had already been through all that stuff. It got to my head a little bit, to be honest, because I'm thinking, oh yeah, look at me. I'm like, man, I've never even deployed, and here I am. So I was definitely arrogant going in there. And I got some good humbling, I'll say that. But it was cool, man. The military does a very good job of training somebody who might not even know how to swing a hammer properly, as silly as that sounds, but there's a right and wrong way to do it. Teach people how to read a tape measure, and really they mold them from not knowing anything about construction to the SeaBee construction battalions are filled with tradespeople basically and administrative staff. And so I basically started my trade knowledge from there. I had a little bit prior, but not nearly as much as I would develop over the next couple months. So we were mixed in with some Army folks, and one of my instructors was actually Army and one was retired Navy. And we got to learn about, everything from concrete up to finishing a roof, like everything minus any MEP or I'll break it down for you. So you have 7 different rates in a SeaBee battalion, or as a SeaBee. In the battalion, you have all different people because you have administrative support, medical, all that stuff. But the main SeaBee rates, you got builders, and the builders are just that. They're builders at heart. So we did concrete, masonry, framing, finish work sometimes, depending on what unit you're in. Then you've got utilities men, and these are your MEP guys. So they're doing plumbing and HVAC. We have electricians, so CEs, construction electricians. Pretty obvious what they do. You've got engineering aides, and those are the ones that are basically, they'd be like your layout folks. So they're doing surveying. Who am I missing here? Construction mechanics. So they're working on all the big equipment. Then you've got the equipment operators who are obviously operating the equipment. And man, I'm having a brain fart. Who did I forget? Oh, the welders. How could I forget? So, and then you have steel workers, the SWs, the welders. And they break the battalion down into different companies, much like an infantry battalion. Charlie battalion was the builders and welders. So we all trained in different places all over the U.S., but the welders and the builders trained in Gulfport. And so at this point, I'm starting to get used to the lifestyle of construction. Went through that training. I couldn't recall how long the A school was. It might have been 2 or 3 months. And then you wait to get your orders. So you can go to a multitude of different types of units. But the bread and butter of the SeaBees is the NMCB, the Naval Mobile Construction Battalion. So these are the guys going out, deploying and supporting other units and setting up bases. They also have amphibious units that you can go to, and then you can kind of branch out from there. You can become more specialized in one thing. Some SeaBees get attached to SEAL units full time, and they become their support. Some become divers, so they have UCTs, which is underwater construction team, which is really neat. And so I'm beginning to learn about all this stuff. And then I went to my unit. So I went to NMCB 74. So funny thing is, my first unit got decommissioned. NMCB 74 later on got commissioned after I was out. I'm thinking, am I a bad omen? Like, what is going on here? And we can talk about it in a little bit, but I went on to another command that was a detachment of a main command that got decommissioned. I'm going, man, wow. I got lucky. So I don't know what happened, but things happen, people downsize. So I deployed twice with that battalion, and man, got a lot of experience. So that's bigger than a nutshell, but there you go.
Yeah, that's first of all, I'm very impressed by the detail in which you remember these things. That's awesome, and it's definitely not easy. I catch myself forgetting that level of detail all the time nowadays. Second is really interesting to hear how I didn't know to that depth in terms of how that kind of battalion is made up and the opportunities from there, and also the way in which they're, all of you guys are trained and such. So really cool to hear that, and I'm sure a lot of people will be pleasantly surprised by that whole kind of picture that you just painted for us. So where do you go from finishing your training, finally in that scenario? Where do you go next from there?
Yeah, so once I finished the training, I got my assignment to my battalion. I was in the same spot. So there are battalions that are in Gulfport, and there are battalions that are in California. So I can't recall if we had the chance to pick, but I didn't want to move, so I wanted to stay where I was at. So I stayed in Gulfport for the next few years, got attached to that battalion. I reported on board, and you get assigned to your company, start meeting your buddies. Some of them you went through school with. So these guys are already like you're pretty tight with them because you've been in the barracks going through training together. Since I had some rank at the time, I was able to move off post. So I had my apartment, and just kind of started doing my job. So at the time we were starting, to work up to a rotation, and we thought that we were going to go to, oh man, I'm going to forget this. There's an island that we were supposed to go to that is, man, I can't recall the name of the island, but there was it was basically going to be like a cakewalk deployment. Mm-hmm. And we're going, man, I'm going to be drinking beers at the end of the day and fishing and like be on the beach. Cause it was a beautiful deployment. I wasn't complaining. I thought this is going to be amazing. My first deployment. Cause I know there's a lot of guys in the mindset of like, I just want to go to combat. And I'm thinking, well, if I got to do this, that's okay with me. I'm fine with that. So I'm thinking we're going to have it real cake, but come to find out maybe a month before we left that we got orders to Kuwait, and Kuwait at the time was just boring. I mean, everything is already past at this point, and Kuwait was just kind of a facility to push people into Iraq. And so we ended up deploying to Kuwait. Most of the job that we did was like camp maintenance. So kind of like service work that you would see. So we get calls to go fix this, go fix that. I was still a bit of a knucklehead, ended up getting in a couple fights. And so I got reassigned on that deployment, same camp and everything, but I think to shapen me up, they gave me to our gunnery sergeant. So every SeaBee battalion has a Marine Corps gunnery sergeant, and that is your military advisor because they trained us in tactics and everything. So I got attached to him and a guy who outranked me to go work on the range. So it was, looking back, I mean, I needed it. He was really hard on me, really great guy. I mean, he was an infantry Marine. But he trained me, and we basically became instructors on how to teach the SeaBees that were pushing into Iraq at the time on their tactics, requal them on their weapons. So the majority of that deployment was really just getting these guys ready to understand what environment they were going into. Now, looking back, I'm thinking, I haven't been in this environment. I felt kind of like an imposter, but I did what I had to do, and I just listened to the gunny and trained these folks going out. And it was, and there were days I wanted to impress him so much that there were days that I would just stay up making sure like all the ammo was ready to go. Everything was perfect. The MRAPs were set up for us to drive out to the range, and I was so stressed, but I would stay awake for like 3 days to make sure that everything was perfect. In hindsight, that was a really stupid idea because I can remember driving out to the range and like about to drive off the road, and this massive MRAP, and he's like, "Fran, what are you doing?" Yelling at me. I'm fine, Gunny. I'm fine. And, but it was good training to have, just kind of the grit to stick it out and do what needed to be done. But like I said, there's jokes still nowadays that Kuwait's not a real deployment. We kind of jab each other as vets. But I did get a chance, we came back and had a little bit of downtime, and then we started working up to our Afghanistan deployment. There was a selection process basically that took I want to say it was 3 dozen, maybe a little less, maybe a little more. There was a small portion of our unit that got selected to be on a task force to go serve JSOC, which is Joint Special Operations Command. I had no idea what that was about. I had never heard of it. I didn't know what JSOC was. I don't think I really understood the gravity of it until I came back from deployment. But that group got split up into different camps. So we ended up deploying to Afghanistan, and we got my group, which was probably, I don't know, maybe a dozen of us or so. We stayed on Bagram, and we stayed on a specialized camp at the time. Had to sign all these waivers, couldn't take pictures, all that kind of stuff. And we're going, what have we gotten ourselves into? I mean, we didn't choose this. We got chosen. But it was really neat. We got to serve with the guys at the tip of the spear, and they would take from that group, and we would fly out to different FOBs and go support them. I didn't know what a Ranger battalion was at the time. So my first FOB I went to, 1st Ranger Bat was there. And we went and built them a camp, did some camp maintenance for them. Then Dev Group, we had to go build on one of the FOBs for them as well. And we would just kind of pop around and build as they needed, I guess. And it was looking back, like a really cool experience, like very unique experience. I've said before, OSHA does not exist on a deployment. So like you do what you got to do to get it done. But yeah, man, I mean, looking back, I'm so glad I had that experience. And it's really neat too when I run into folks that have served in those high speed units, and I tell them I'm a SeaBee. It's always the same reaction, like, "Oh man, I love you guys. SeaBees are great." And we always look at them like, "You're the folks we look up to. You're awesome." But I think there's a mutual respect there because I've had the same conversation with guys that are former Green Berets on my show, that, you know, they realize to a point that you can't do your job without those support folks. And we were supporting them, but we still had the same mentality like construction workers do on the outside. It was just rough and gruff and like ready to go, do whatever it takes. We like to say we tactically acquire things to get the job done if we don't have them. So I can't confirm or deny whether we, you know, acquired Humvees if we needed them, but you know, it was a good time, man.
Yeah, that, you know, that sounds like a really cool experience and a really cool thing that you essentially fell into, right? Because you had no idea what you're getting into at that point. Where was
Yeah.
that selection process happening? Was that from Kuwait, or you had come back already to the U.S.?
No, you know, I honestly don't know how they picked the people. I'm looking back on, I was such a dummy. Like, I don't know why they picked me, but I think there were, looking back with the guys that I'm still friends with today, I think it was a lot of the guys that had the same A-type mentality, that we were potentially the ones that were going to carry this through our career, thinking we were going to make a career out of it. Yeah, so I couldn't tell you what their criteria was. I think they just selected who their good folks were when that in the unit, and we got selected for that specific task force. So,
and that was directly from like while you were deployed in Kuwait. That's where you got pulled, or you had already come back to
no,
the U.S.
so the Kuwait deployment was a totally separate deployment. That was about 6 months we did there. Came back, and then they're slotting people for different areas because we had people that would go all over Afghanistan for different things. So we were excited to find out the battalion was going there. But the cool thing is, you know, everybody's got their own little mission set. Like we had guys drilling for wells. We had people that went to Africa. And so they were able to break this 600 plus person battalion down into these little chunks to really fan out and accomplish the mission. Because we, you know, like I said earlier, as a builder, you had all these different skills that you could do. So they need concrete over here. Okay, we're going to send these guys over here. They need framing over here. Because like when I was back on Bagram, we built a probably 5,000 square foot logistical prep space for one of the SEAL teams. And so we're doing wood stick framing. And then on another fob, we're building basic creature comforts and necessities that those guys needed, like tent camps and all that kind of stuff. So the role really varied, which was neat. But we found out, you know, this guy's going here after we were already backing, and it was sometime before we deployed because everybody also had to make sure that they were up on, you know, all their skills, whether you were qualified as a 50 cal gunner or whatever. Everybody had to have those specific checks in the box to make sure that they could be on that team.
Yeah, that's really cool. You know, I was actually just about to ask what were things that you're building, and you just touched on at least two of them. What, you know, anything else come to mind, just out of curiosity, in terms of what you literally built on that Afghanistan deployment?
So on that deployment, we trained in a lot of stuff that we didn't end up building. Like SeaBees were known for a while for building bridges. So there's different bridge types that you have to go to schools to learn how to build, or huts. So we would, which is basically, it's just a small house. You're learning how to properly frame out, like you're doing your piece of it. You're laying the foundation. So you got the EAs that come in and they survey all the land. You build the foundation, and then the electrical guys and plumbers take it over from there. So I'm trying to think of a couple things that we did. So we rehabbed the first job. Let me see. I want to say this was the first or second job we did there. There was an old beat up, like I'll call it a team room, if you will, kind of where they planned everything out before they went on missions. We did just a little cleanup and rehab of that. So then one of the camps that we were at, a lot of it was just maintenance and building some of the creature comforts they needed, or just structures. And then the camp that I spent most of my time on, I actually went to twice. So the first time we went, we built like very simple, down and dirty tent platforms and just the bare minimum of what they needed to get the tents set up and start operating. Then we went back and we ended up building them like showers and berthing. I got to build one of those huts. It was specifically for their security team. So we pretty much built a mini house that was probably maybe 12 by 12 or 10 by 10. And it was just for a guard, because they had prefabricated prison cells that they would bring these guys in, hold them there for a little bit before they took them back to the main camp. So I got to learn the basics of what would become eventually my job.
Right. Man, that's really cool. Yeah, I wasn't, I guess, privy to the, like I said before, the details of what SeaBees really do, as you describe for everyone listening. And I can also definitely understand and relate to how, to your point, right, veterans that you spoke to on your show can really appreciate what you did, right? Imagine showing up at a fob and you got things set up for you already. That's a huge difference just mentally. Yeah, so that's really cool. So
yeah, and there's a lot. So we're trained to do enough. I mean, the concept is that the SeaBee battalion is basically this self-sustained unit that can go into an area, provide perimeter security, set up their own barricades, if you will, and build a city if they really wanted to. I mean, there's the manpower to do that, get the materials and make it happen. So you're training with, like I said, the Marines and all these other units to learn, like, what do these basic tactics look like to defend myself? So leading up to the deployment, you're doing field exercises, just like maybe the Army would. Like, we're out there in the mud for, maybe a couple of weeks. We went out on our field training and they're throwing the gas and everything, like preparing us for all this. And you're operating as though you're a single unit with no support. And so you're having to build that camp. And man, it sucks at the time because you're like in the rain. People are throwing these, tear gas. You're having to wear your mask. This sucks. I'm in MOP 4 or whatever. Looking back, you're like, that was really good training if I ever had to go into that condition. And we would build towers, like heavy timber stuff. It was really neat, man.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. That's awesome. So what happens, when you close out that Afghanistan deployment? What's next?
So we got back from Afghanistan. And I actually re-enlisted while I was in Afghanistan. I wasn't sure. I was really on the fence. Of course, they're coaxing you into it. Like, you
Right.
sure you don't want to re-enlist? And I thought, you know what? I'm probably going to make a career out of this. Not everybody has this same story. I'm very fortunate that I had a lot of really good leadership. Like I said, I was a numbskull my first deployment, and I had a few senior NCOs that really looked after me. And I think they saw something in me that I didn't see in myself at the time. And they fostered that, and they really helped me mature and grow not only my skills, but just as a man. And so after that, or during that deployment, I ended up re-enlisting for, let's see, I had originally re-enlisted for another 4 years. And when I got back, my orders were up and I got reassigned. Again, you have this sheet of where do I want to go? And I had friends in the DC area at the time. And I went to another one of those SeaBee units, which is a CBMU. So that's a construction battalion maintenance unit. So most branches have like we call it a seashore rotation. So, you don't want to burn your people out. So like on the ship side of things, they have their ship duty, and then maybe they'll come back for a few years and be an instructor. So my shore duty was a CBMU, which was, we built basically to residential code. So I did a job at the Washington Navy Yard where we rehabbed 2 of their bathrooms, like new tile and all that kind of stuff. So I was really learning like the actual codes instead of just whipping something together in a combat zone. So I was learning the codes, and I actually, the way I gained rank to study for my test, I started taking my general contractor's license. And so I'm studying all these things about how framing is, and I ended up taking the test and I passed with flying colors, which was really cool because I guess I didn't realize at the time, like how much of my job really was just being a builder. And there were some tactics involved in it, but it was mostly just, how do you build? Yeah. So I did a couple years there, but I actually got a year early out. I made a request because my mindset had shifted at the time. And I thought, well, I think I'm going to get out and pursue school full time. I was already taking night classes. I took full advantage of that. Tried to get my undergrad while I was in. I ended up I didn't finish it while I was in. I got it once I was out of the service, but my year early out got granted. If I had one regret, it was maybe weeks before I separated. The guys that were the full-time CVs with this SEAL unit, they came to recruit at our command. And I ran into this guy who was an E6 on deployment with me with that Afghanistan deployment, he was full-time, like they call it camp czar, the guy that basically oversaw all the camps for the SEALs. But he was a SeaBee. He was a builder first class. I was a third class when I met him. I was a second class at this point. And he's like, hey man, you know, I forgot his name now, but we hadn't seen each other for probably years at this point. And he had a beard and everything on deployment, but I still remembered what he looked like. I was like, hey dude. And we got to talking. He's like, hey, you know, we're here recruiting. What do you think? You want to try out? And I said, man, I've already put my paperwork in and it's processed. I'm getting out. And he's like, are you kidding me? And my chief wasn't happy because I never, you know, I might have been a knucklehead, but I never went to captain's master, got into that much trouble. And so I was one of the good ones, I guess, looking back on it. And my chief was not happy. Like, why are you doing this? Why are you getting out? What's going on? Like, he was very upset by that because I wasn't one of the bad ones that they didn't care if I left. But I already had a job lined up. I was already in school. So I got the request authorized and I transitioned out. So I was actually on terminal leave for like a month. So I was double dipping. I had a full-time job already and I was still on my terminal leave from the military. So
yeah, that's pretty amazing that you got a job in that situation. Tell us about that, how that happened.
LinkedIn is a wonderful thing.
Yes.
I will just, this was, let's see, I separated in 2011. And I had probably been on LinkedIn for a couple years up to this point because a friend suggested it to me and I'm like, what in the world is this? Mm-hmm. So this was still when LinkedIn was like, all it was like a meetup type app. So my friend encouraged me, and I'm not a shy guy. Like, we have podcasts, right? You can't be a shy guy to have a podcast. So I've just always been very open and willing to share my story. Mm. And so a friend suggested LinkedIn. I got on there. I started going to some networking events, and I ended up meeting the chief estimator of the company I worked for when I got out, another big GC, and he liked my story, and I was very motivated at the time. I even made my own business cards. Like, I don't know why I did this, but I'm glad I did.
Yeah.
But it was just like, I got to find one of these, man. If I find it, I'll send you a picture. But I had no qualifications. I say that, but looking back, I'm like, I had all these things that I did that I really did carry over, and I discounted myself, and I don't want other vets to do that because they come out with amazing qualifications. And so, you know, he took a chance on me, and they had a really good program where they would take people that were fresh out of the service or fresh out of college, put them in the field for a year. Then they could decide whether they wanted to work in the office or in the field. And I was so fortunate that I felt like, and I still feel like this, that bond that we had with our team is very similar to the construction industry where, you know, the guys in the field, I was like, this is great. These are guys that have been doing this 30 years and I can learn so much from them. And even though I might be on the management side of things, like, I'm just soaking up all this knowledge. So I had a really rough transition. I started drinking very heavily. I'm not ashamed to say that. And it was an issue. I didn't realize it at the time, but I struggled. And having that landing spot and being in this industry really helped, because it was a really easy transition in that aspect where everything was different every day. I missed that about the service. Not in like a stressful way all the time, which it can be obviously in this industry, but I had, again, some awesome leadership. And you find so many veterans in this space that it's like, hey man, I'm having a rough time. Can we talk about this? I don't know what I want to do with my life, my career. Yeah. And that really helped me for sure.
Yeah, man. Yeah. I mean, I'll take a full step back and then get to where you just ended. First and foremost, LinkedIn, right? Whenever people ask me what's something that you would, you know, recommend to your younger self, you know, asking me, or recommend to whatever, someone in high school or a veteran in active duty, that's the first thing I always say is just start getting active on LinkedIn. You never know what kind of opportunities that, you know, will be created. I mean, that's how we connected, right? So highly recommend LinkedIn. That's how you got your first job, which is really awesome to hear. And you did that, you know, multitasking per se, right? I mean, you're still in service, you're in school, yet you still found a job because of LinkedIn. So that's really cool. Now getting into that transition period, right? Talked about, you know, drinking and not even realizing it at the time. It's really interesting how difficult it is to recognize those kind of patterns that we fall in, especially in that stage, which is shifting from extremes, right? Shifting from this military environment ecosystem and everything that does to you, for you, with you, and then into all of a sudden now you're on your own, right? You're civilian. So, big of you even now, right? It's awesome that you're able to recognize in hindsight and call that out, right? I mean, I'm sure tell me if I'm wrong here. I'm sure that's helpful for you to just acknowledge and just talk about, allow for other people to hear and acknowledge for themselves. So, yeah, thank you for sharing that. And then,
Sure.
yeah, absolutely. And then, last but not least, I'm losing where you ended up there. What was the last part that you said? I'm sorry if you remember.
Yeah, just that I transitioned out into a big GC, and I had never experienced any corporate world. Like I didn't
Right.
grow up with that environment, and so that was another shock. Like it was this cultural shock for me, big time.
Yeah.
So
The two other pieces that you highlighted, right, was that, I mean, especially in your case, as you were telling us your story as it relates to SeaBees and your training, what you're doing. I mean, I had to hold back from laughing because it was just the most ideal transition, right? Yet when you transition, it's still tough to recognize how these skill sets can translate into the field once you're out of military, once you're out of that kind of structure. So I wanted to highlight that definitely had an amazing skill set that you were able to translate. It's awesome that that person you met for that first job was able to recognize that in your story and then offer you that position. So just wanted to point that out for you and for our listeners. Yeah, talk to us about a little bit more on that transition period and any other things that happened or things that you're doing, as well as advice you'd kind of give to your younger self.
yeah, so looking back, it wasn't the skills like the carpentry skills that really carried me. I think it was what helped me the most was that I knew how to manage and lead a team. So it came really naturally to me. Whereas like my counterparts that might have just graduated college, they knew a lot more about the technical skills, whereas I knew how to talk to people, lead people, motivate people. I'm not saying I'm the best at it. I certainly have grown a lot since then. But I would encourage people too to look at those soft skills because, man, I feel like every guest that I have that we talk about that as veterans, like we have, and I'm not saying non-vets don't have these, but it's kind of baked into you as an 18-year-old kid right from the get-go. Um, a year into your service, you're going to be leading somebody, even if it's that kid straight out of boot camp. So don't take that for granted. I mean, understand, yeah, your senior leaders are going to be hard on you, but it's probably because they see something in you. That was something really difficult for me to see in the beginning. And even sometimes now, I might get my butt chewed every now and again, but I understand now. I'm wiser now to understand that they're really trying to help me be a better version of me. So the transition really, I tried to go back in, to be quite honest. I struggled. I thought I'm not going to succeed in this because I'm coming. I didn't grow up. Like I said, I don't want to say, if I said I'm humble, that's going to sound like I don't have any humility, but like I'm humble enough to know that I don't deserve this. Right. And I look at it and I don't have an ego of like, well, I'm the boss. I'm the superintendent. I deserve this. It's never been that way. And I'm glad. I hope I always have that mindset. I'm very fortunate to have what I have. But I really struggled with that at first, going, this is too big. There's no way I'm going to learn this. And I can remember having a discussion with my boss at the time. God bless this guy. He's still involved in my life. He's about to retire now. He poured into me a lot. Even when I met my wife, I can remember him and his wife taking us out to dinner and coaching us on marriage and what a godly marriage looks like and how we can help support each other and serve each other. But I can remember him sitting me down saying, hey man, like, let's set some realistic expectations. It's probably going to take you like 5 years to really understand what's going on. Cause I would sit in these meetings and I started taking notes about stuff I didn't understand. And I just felt overwhelmed, but he would teach me about, well, this is what we meant. What's an RFI? What the heck's a submittal? Why is this important on a schedule? What's a critical path? And like writing these things down, not understanding at the time. And I can remember calling him, and it was probably about the 5-year mark. And I said, I get it. Like, I finally get it. And he's like, well, it's about dang time, teasing me. But a lot of people need to realize that like it's not going to be an easy, fast process. And so I struggled and tried to go back into the service. And that's a whole other story and podcast in itself of how difficult that was. But I think that God had me placed in that position for a reason. Ended up meeting my wife. We've been married over 11 years now. So she met me post-service. And it's the best thing that's ever happened to me. I got 3 beautiful children now, and I'm able to take the skills that I had in the service. And now we're on the same mission, you and I. Looking back going, you kind of want to shake these guys that are getting out of the service going, you have such amazing skills that you can transfer really into any industry. But if you want that environment that is going to adopt you in, and it's going to feel like that camaraderie that you had in the service, then the construction industry really is it. And the road is just, it's endless with knowledge and just your growth in your career. I respect so much the folks in their 60s that are nearing retirement saying, I still learn something every day, because our industry, even in the last decade, has changed. Use you as an example. The technology in the last decade, it's just, it blows my mind where we've come and where we came from. And it's continuing to evolve. And it's just neat because I'm such a geek. I'm like, this is awesome. Like anything that makes my job easier, let's go. But as far as like the advice to my younger self or folks that are getting out is LinkedIn is huge, but it's not just a platform that you have to use. It's the networking. So it doesn't necessarily have to be LinkedIn. You got to get out of your comfort zone. And I have people even this week that have reached out to me that I don't know. And kudos to them that have sent me messages and, I'm interested in the industry. Nobody is going to reach out and help unless they know that you want it. Like, and it sometimes comes off very harsh, but like, I'm not going to want to help you unless you want to help yourself. So I have had my wife's come up to me multiple times with so-and-so's looking for a job. I might've given their husband your information. I said, okay, I'll wait for them to email me. Very few times has that happened. So I am always willing to help anybody, but you have to take that first step. And that first step is always the hardest.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. What other advice comes to mind on the, I'll call it more psychological aspect of transitioning?
Ooh, that's a big one.
Yeah.
I was not prepared, and I would hope other people are. I was not prepared at the mindset shift that, I think the best about people. I want to believe that everybody has the same humility level or their intentions are always good. And you just have to realize that in the service, a majority of those people, for the most part, are very A-type. Now there's knuckleheads everywhere in every industry. It's fairly few and far between in the service. I mean, most people are very disciplined, and that's why a lot of people join. But when you get out, you're not used to, like, it frustrated me for a while of like, why aren't people working their butt off to accomplish some of these tasks? And it took me a long time to really come down, like, hold on a second, I've got to have a personal life. And I'm glad I did it at the time when I was single with no kids I'd work the 16, 18-hour days just so I could learn. So you need to be willing to put in the hard work, but don't do it so long that you're going to burn yourself out. But also don't hold everybody up to the standard of the people that you served with. Like, not everybody's going to be like that. There are going to be some people that are far beyond that. I think another thing, and this is kind of a funny story that shocked me, is I'm used to people retiring out when they're like my age now. So these are, folks maybe in their late 30s, early 40s. That was like an old man in the service. You get out and you're like, oh my gosh, this guy's a dinosaur and he's only like 50. And so that was a huge shock to me. So it's a culture shock in itself because you're going into this different world. So I think psychologically you've got to plan for, hey, I'm my entire life's going to change. Yeah. Everything I know. And that's a very hard transition for people. And it took me, I'll say easily a decade to really I don't want to say calm down, but really just kind of feel comfortable in who I am now. Like I'm proud of what I did. I'm proud to be a veteran, but that's not everything that defines me.
Yeah, really well said. It's a lot of recognizing whatever your own personal expectation is, and then realizing that might not be reality, and it probably isn't reality. And then also recognizing as you continue, becoming your own person, creating your own path personally and professionally, it might take a while for you to kind of fully grow into yourself. You mentioned decade. I mean, it was more or less like that for me too. And, I hear that so often. I think it's pretty much a standard almost, I'll call it, for lack of a better term, in terms of time frame that it takes to kind of really shift and transition into, just being in your comfort space, for whatever, for whatever that's worth. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. Really
Yeah.
good information, Scott. So you already touched on considering you made the shift already while in service, right? Getting into the construction industry. You talked about that first role. Tell us kind of where you're at today and what got you there here.
Oh boy, you ready for another episode? Or
Two-part series.
we moved around a lot. So when I got married, we actually were fortunate enough to I worked in Germany for a year in our industry. So that's one thing people should know is that there's a ton of opportunity out there overseas, or the world's your oyster. When you get out, like you can move anywhere. This industry is everywhere, especially in any metropolitan area. Like you're going to find work. So let's see. Let me take you down the path. I was in DC. And I was a project engineer, got promoted to assistant superintendent, started running some smaller jobs. It's always been commercial for me. Then let's see, after DC, went to Germany, came back. I was actually out of work for about 4 months. Then we moved to El Paso. I was a project manager for a big nationwide GC down there. Started working in healthcare. After El Paso, we stayed in El Paso for a couple of years. Then went to south of Houston. And then I actually went to the sub side for a little bit. I spent about a year as an operations manager for a millwork company. Got a lot of really good experience. Missed the GC side. I'm glad I did it. I'm glad I actually went into the office for a little bit too, and I got this wide breadth of experience, which I'm really happy because I'm glad I got to see it from the other side. So when this superintendent like me is calling people, yelling at them like I need this, I don't do that anymore because I understand how stressful that can be.
Right.
Because they've got their own jobs they got to worry about. So let's see. After that, came back to the GC side in Houston, and then the company I was at the time needed some help in Dallas. They did not have any superintendents at the time, and I said, "Yeah, why not? Let's do it." And so I traveled up here for a few months, and then we moved here close to 7 years ago, and I'm settled. I'm with a fantastic company. It's really been neat. The last 2 jobs I've been on, I've been able to say, this is the biggest job I've ever ran in my career. And then I got to say it again. So I'm on a project doing, it's about 340,000 square feet. We've also got some exterior work that we're doing, some structural work. And it's just, man, it's been so humbling. And I've got a big team surrounding me. We're in a big triple wide trailer, and I've got the project management team in there with me, and my foreman, another superintendent. And it's really cool, man, because I go back to that kid getting out of the service, and I'm looking up to my boss. Like, I want to be like him someday, because like I said, he was really humble and took me under his wing. And I'm getting to that point where I'm starting to be able to do that for people. And it's kind of, I don't want to say bittersweet, but yeah, it's really, I'm taking a shift. I'm in that position of my life now. So where I go from here, I as long as I can still lead teams and motivate people, that's really what I want. Whatever my title is, I don't care. Just let me be with the people and keep running work.
That's amazing, man. Congratulations. That's an awesome career path and trajectory. I was going to say, as you're closing out there, it sounds like you're shifting in kind of this next stage of your, professional path. So you ended up saying it yourself. So that's really cool. It's really nice. Before we close out the kind of professional side here, I want to just give the opportunity to kind of highlight translatable skills military to profession. I know we touched on a handful throughout the conversation, but want to kind of double down on those.
Yeah. So, like, what are the best skills you think that vets can use in the industry?
Yeah, I mean, just in your experience, what you yourself have leverage, or what you see other veterans leveraging translatable skills from your service to your career.
Yeah, I think high stress tolerance is a big one. I'm not going to sugarcoat it that our industry is, I'm not going to say it's easy. There are good times that are really good. There's bad times that are really bad. I mean, they can be extremely stressful, but understanding that it's very cliche to say it could be worse, but when you've been in our position, no matter what job you did in the service, you can go back and go, it definitely can be worse. I know that for a fact. So everything's kind of relative. So I wouldn't say vets have had it worse than anybody. There's some people with tough upbringings. I get that. But we have that skill to, like, this sucks, but at least I get to go home and sleep in my bed tonight. Or if you're a traveler, I get to go sleep in a bed. Like, you get it that there's going to be an end to this day. And there are tragedies that happen in our industry, sadly, but you know, more than likely everybody's going to go home that day. And I think that's something that brings me comfort, that today might have sucked, but I can go home and hug my girls, and they run up to me and say, "Daddy," and I can't do that if I'm downrange for 9 months. So that was the biggest thing I take away, was that this sucks, but it could be way worse. And so that's why I'm usually a pretty chipper guy.
That's awesome. I love to hear that. And, I would just recommend to any listener to continue to remind themselves of that very fact, right? It's easy to get in, the thick of things, per se, on a job site and forget exactly what you just said, Scott. So yeah, that's an awesome principle to just hold by, in your day-to-day life.
Yeah.
So as we close out the professional side, I want to give you the opportunity to plug in any career wins that you're proud of. I want to forcibly give you space to talk about your podcast as well. Give a shout out to that.
Oh, career, man. Like I said, I'm just really happy where I'm at right now, and that I've gotten the chance to run big work, and it can only, I hope it only goes up from here. I feel very fortunate to be at the company I'm at, and the team that we have. I've got a ton of support, which is very helpful. It was a breath of fresh air to be a superintendent again and not have to be like the everything man. So that's really good, because when you work doing, multi-million-dollar jobs, it's hard to balance it all. So that's been really cool for me. I think the biggest highlights of my career, and again, this is going to sound super cliche, but when I get to, like, promote people, or, I get to pick somebody by name, and that does so much for them personally, that to me is so rewarding. I've never left a company because of money. I've never been a money chaser. There are people that might have a senior in front of their name that have been doing this as long as I have, like colleagues of mine or friends of mine, and that's never been my thing. And I'm not saying that it is theirs, but yeah, I think the last couple jobs that I've been able to run has been really cool. Just, man, this is really neat that I get to do this every single day. And yeah, I don't know if that's really hard to quantify or to qualify, if you will. So I think that's tough, but just being at this company that I'm with has been really rewarding. So feel like you're cared for. That's a big thing. So the podcast, I started a little over a year ago, and like I said, we have the same mission. And the impetus to that was, we complain a lot in our industry about a lot of different things. And I think the biggest one that I've heard the last few years more than anything is, like, we can't find people. We can't find people. And some people complain, like, oh, it's a generational thing. I've heard that for the last decade plus. Like, it's not, I don't believe that. And I think, like we talked on our first conversation, that I have had some people that work harder than anybody I've served with that didn't serve and is from a younger generation. So I don't believe that. I think it's about your environment and your upbringing. So looking at all this, and I'm going, we have a massive group of veterans that are struggling to find work. And we have a huge industry that needs people. And so maybe I'm naive, but why are we not trying to recruit people that are separating out? And I think I shared with you when I separated, you go through this process and they teach you how to be a civilian again, but there was nobody there from the construction industry. I just happened to meet some people and it worked out for me, which is great. But we kind of suck as an industry really going out and reaching out to these people that are separating. And I'm going, man, this is the future of builders. Like, these are able-bodied people that most of them that are separating out, I think the statistic was 200,000 people a year separating out of the service. So that's, some are retiring, yes, but a majority of them are these 1 or 2 contract commitment folks that are in their mid 20s or early 20s that are able-bodied, smart, hungry, and want work. And we're looking for that. And they have all these soft skills that we're looking for. You can teach anybody what we do. That you can teach somebody how to engineer a building, and I'm not trying to take anything from engineers, but I mean, you can teach them how to put these things together. You can teach them, how to draw this, and all those technical skills will come. What you can't teach is the integrity, the drive. Like, I'm not going to drag somebody across the finish line. I need somebody that's hungry. And I feel like we're missing out on this massive generation of people. And you probably hear it a ton as well. It's just like, I can't find work. I can't find work. A lot of veterans. And I'm going, man, it's out there, but we're just not doing a good job connecting the dots. So I started the podcast about a year ago. And what's been really cool is I started it with that intent. And then I'm getting messages all the time from people. Like I said, just this week, there's a guy, he's a master sergeant and he's getting out of the service. He's retiring, wants to be in our industry, is humble enough to say, hey, I don't care what my title is. He knows he's probably going to start as like a PE, like project engineer, or maybe an assistant PM, which I think that mentality has shifted a lot too with people transitioning out, that they're humble enough to know I'm probably not going to step into a C-suite position. I need to kind of lower my expectations a little bit. And people will reach out to me and, hey man, can you talk to me about XYZ position or whatnot? Hey, more often than not, I can't personally, but I will always try to connect them with somebody who does. So I try to build that relationship with these other people, and hopefully something comes to fruition. But I've also, selfishly enough, and you'll get this too, is like, I get to meet these awesome people that I would never have gotten to talk to, because I just thought, I'm going to do a podcast. Yeah. Like, why not? And you and I both know it's not easy. No. It takes a lot of time commitment. Mm-hmm. But it's so rewarding to get to do that. And then it goes back to the networking thing, man. I've made some wonderful relationships in the last year and gotten invited to things that I never thought I would be invited to, and meet these people. And again, I look back, I'm like, I don't deserve this. This is awesome. And I hope I keep that mentality, and I want to keep that mentality. And you have encouraged me to stop slacking on my podcast, because I haven't put much content out this year at all. I will be putting out more videos this weekend. My wife and kids are traveling, so I'm going to suck it up and do that. But I've got some more guests waiting. But yes, hopefully something comes of it. We actually, a nonprofit, which is, it's not, it's related to the podcast, but it's not really part of the podcast, I guess. So I started the nonprofit with a couple of buddies of mine. One's a Marine vet, one's currently serving in the Coast Guard, and a couple other pretty notable names in the veteran community. We got our 501c3 designation last year, and I'm slowly trying to grow that as well. It's called Memorial Ranch, and we're growing that as a place for people that are struggling, vets and first responders, to have a place to find some rest and respite, and really support them in that they might be transitioning, or they might have been out for a while and they're still struggling, and give them the tools to survive. I mean, as a civilian. And I was thinking about this before we talked. The cool thing that I found in the veteran community is that, like, you're doing the same thing I am, but there's not this like competition. I'm like, good. Let's get the message out there. And it's the same thing in the nonprofit veteran community, where I've talked to people that are part of big organizations, and I'm thinking, this person's never going to help me because they're going to think I'm like trying to steal business, if you will. But they'll say the same thing, like there are never enough.
Yeah.
And I don't think we can have enough podcasts, books, shows, networking events, all these things to encourage our brothers and sisters to get into this community that we've fallen in love with in construction. And we want to share that. So if there's somebody out there that is listening, start a podcast, man, if that's your deal. Go.
Totally, man. That's awesome. I'm glad to have given you that opportunity to share your story on this channel, for exactly that reason, right? I mean, the more the merrier, the more we can, push the message, the more people will hear it. Not easy to get messages across to, uh, as many people, as many veterans exist. So, the more the merrier for sure. The other thing that we talked about when we chatted on the phone before the show, sorry, was the similarities in serving and the AEC industry, which is also why, to your point, it makes so much sense to create that bridge, right, to recruit from veterans that are finishing their service into our industry. So that was just another really neat conversation that I absolutely agreed with, and I think it's important to point out, right, is you'll find a lot of kind of just similar dynamics that really help you feel, you being a veteran, help you feel kind of at home per se when you join the industry. So kind of helps that transition period to the extent that it can.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Absolutely, brother.
Awesome. All right, man. So as we close out, final two questions here. First is tell us about your wellness practice, what you recommend.
I was thinking about this entire interview when you told me that was going to be one of the questions. So my wife and I are fortunate enough. We have about a little over half an acre on our property.
Awesome.
Not anything to brag about, but we don't have an HOA here, which helps. So mentally, what helps me is I'm able to still build things. She's huge into Pinterest. And so like every Pinterest thing she finds, she wants me to build. So we've got our garden and things. We've got the chickens and the rabbits, but that has really, it's helped me use the skills that I have, but also feel like, I'm doing something for her, and it's a way that I can express that I love her and that she's appreciative for, or building things for the kids. That really, it seems like, it's hard work to do some of this stuff. Like I built our garden fence and everything. And so I had the auger out there by myself, and it was hard work, but it was so satisfying because of my role. I don't get to do that anymore. I don't get to be on the tools. So I like to tinker with those things, and that, it's physically demanding, which helps a lot too. I got into a motorcycle wreck probably about a year and a half ago. Before that, I was very active. So when I did my time in the reserves, I was probably in the best shape of my life, because going back to Navy boot camp, I was not going to let that happen again. I wanted to make sure I was in good shape this time. It was like the only time in my life I had a six pack. So I was working out hard, but we're a pretty active family. Like we like to hike. We like to go take time when we can between projects to go on vacation, and really just trying to spend time with my kids. That mentally helps me so much. Coming home after a hard work day, and my little girls run up to me, that's just the best feeling in the world. And then getting to play with them outside. So I like to tinker a lot, and I like to build stuff. So
awesome, man. That's awesome. Last but not least, books that you'd recommend.
Ooh, you can't see it, but I've got my bookshelf sitting next to me, and two of them, and they are full. So that is really hard to choose one book. I would say one of my favorite books to date is Viktor Frankl. Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning.
Yep.
Fantastic book. I think that's got to be up there, at least my top 5 for sure. It's the first one that comes to mind. Just his mindset. And for those that don't know, like just the quick background, he was a prisoner of war, and his mindset on how to get through that. Another one, let's see, man, you asked some really good questions.
for what that's also in my top 5 as well. Giving you
Good
some,
man.
yeah.
All right.
I mean, by the
That
way,
is a great.
yeah, it really is. And also, just further context to what you said, it's all he was also a psychiatrist. So he's
That's right.
medical doctor. So he talks about that experience from the perspective of understanding, psychology to the extent that one can today. So it's really, really interesting, really powerful.
And it's still like there's a lot of good nuggets of wisdom in there that are still applicable today. It's like a timeless classic for sure.
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna lean back. I'm looking at all my books, wondering if I were to suggest another one. So like a business book, or what are you thinking?
Whatever. I mean, whatever you're feeling,
because I read a lot of genres.
Mm-hmm.
Man, I don't know what else comes to mind. I mean, I don't want to sound cliche. Everybody likes Extreme Ownership.
Yeah,
that's a good one.
Mm-hmm.
By Jocko Willing.
Right. Yeah.
I don't know, man. I'm such a glutton for knowledge. Like whatever I can soak up, I love it. So there's not one genre that I'm really like keyed into.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously I'm going to give the total cliche answer, my Bible, obviously.
Yeah,
so
yeah, absolutely.
That's a big one for me. But yeah, I think Man's Search for Meaning is a good one, man.
Yeah, that's awesome. You hit 3, and those are all awesome recommendations. So yeah, well done, man. Awesome. All right, Scott. Really appreciate you sharing your story, man. It really means a lot. I have no doubt it's going to help a lot of people just hearing, what you did, what you went through. Thanks so much for joining the show today.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Yeah. To our listeners, thank you for listening. Our subscribers, thank you for subscribing. A reminder to please subscribe to our channels on YouTube, Apple, and Spotify. A quick shout out to our sponsor, Jet.Build, and take care. See y'all soon. Thank you to our channel sponsors, Jet.Build. If you're looking for ways to better manage your real estate development and construction projects, look no further. Jet is the command center software for end-to-end real estate development and construction management. That's www.jet.build.